It started as a simple conversation between two actors, one known for his silent suffering, the other for depicting the most revered story ever told. But when Keanu Reeves began discussing Jesus, the atmosphere shifted. Mel Gibson's smile faded. His eyes glistened, and for a moment, even the cameras seemed to pause. What Keanu shared was unscripted, and what followed would leave everyone in awe. Before we proceed, share your favorite Keanu Reeves movie in the comments. The golden hour lights stream through the tall windows of the Beverly Hills private screening room, casting elongated shadows across the plush leather chairs arranged in cozy clusters. Tonight's gathering was exclusive. A select group of Hollywood's most influential figures had come together for a private viewing of Mel Gibson's latest directorial endeavor, a passion project that had consumed years of his life and millions of his own dollars. Mel stood at the front of the room, his weathered hands gripping a microphone with the intensity of someone who has invested his soul into his work. At 67, the director carried himself with the assuredness of a man who has survived decades in an industry notorious for devouring even its brightest stars. His sharp, penetrating gaze scanned the assembled crowd of actors, producers, and industry veterans who had gathered to witness what many were calling his most personal film yet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mel began, his voice resonating with a weight that has made him one of cinema's most compelling figures. "What you are about to see tonight isn't just a film. It's a confession. It's a journey through the darkest valleys of human experience toward something that might be called redemption." The audience settled into an expectant silence, aware that they were about to witness something significant. Among the gathered faces, some famous, others powerful, one figure stood out for his quiet demeanor rather than his celebrity status. Keanu Reeves sat in the third row, his characteristic humility on full display as he listened with the focused attention he brings to everything in his life. What none of them knew was that tonight's screening would evolve into something far more profound than a mere movie premiere. They were about to experience a challenge to their understanding of faith, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways grace can arrive when least expected. The film, flickering to life on the massive screen, told the story of a man shattered by his own choices, seeking redemption through an encounter with divine love that defies human comprehension. It was a narrative that mirrored Mel's own journey through scandal, controversy, and a long road back to a semblance of peace. Every frame bore the weight of personal experience, and every dialogue resonated with the authenticity of someone who has walked through fire and emerged scarred yet somehow purified. As the credits rolled 90 minutes later, the room remained in profound silence. This wasn't the polite quiet that typically follows Hollywood screenings, punctuated by the rustle of people preparing to deliver expected compliments. This was the sacred silence that follows genuine art, the kind of hush that envelopes people when they've been touched by something larger than mere entertainment. Mel stepped back to the front of the room, his eyes bright with the vulnerable hope of an artist who has just shared his most intimate work. "I'd like to open the floor for discussion," he said, his voice softer now, more tentative. "This film is about the possibility of redemption, even when we feel we're beyond saving. I'm curious about your thoughts, your reactions, your own experiences with the divine." The invitation hung in the air like a challenge. In an industry built on image management and carefully crafted personas, Mel was asking for authentic spiritual reflection from people who spend their professional lives pretending to be someone else. Several hands raised, and for the next 30 minutes, the room filled with the kind of honest conversation rarely heard in Hollywood circles. Producers spoke about their own struggles with faith. Actors shared stories of moments when they felt touched by something beyond themselves. And directors discussed the challenge of portraying the sacred without diminishing it. But through it all, Keanu remained silent, his dark eyes thoughtful as he listened to each speaker with a patient attention that has endeared him to colleagues and fans alike. Mel noticed Keanu's silence, recognizing something in his expression that suggested deep waters running beneath the calm surface. "Keanu," Mel said finally, his voice carrying across the room with gentle invitation, "you've been quiet tonight. I'm curious about your thoughts on all this, on faith, on redemption, on—" He paused, searching for the right words. "On Jesus." The room fell silent again, but this time the quiet carried anticipation. Everyone present knew Keanu's reputation for thoughtful, profound responses to serious questions. They expected wisdom, perhaps some philosophical insight drawn from his well-documented spiritual seeking. What they didn't expect was what was about to unfold next, for Keanu's response to this simple question about Jesus would shatter every assumption in the room and leave Mel Gibson, a man who has built his career on stories of faith and redemption, in tears. As Keanu took a deep breath and prepared to speak, something in his expression suggested that what he was about to share would do more than just move his audience. It would challenge everything they thought they knew about divine love, human forgiveness, and the mysterious ways grace can transform even the most broken lives. Yet none of them realized that Keanu's words were about to reveal a truth so profound, so personally transformative, that it would leave everyone in that room questioning not just their understanding of Jesus but their understanding of themselves. Keanu shifted slightly in his chair, his hands resting calmly on his knees as every eye in the room focused on him. There was something in his posture, a stillness that went beyond mere composure, that suggested he was accessing memories he didn't often share publicly. "You know, Mal," Keanu began, his voice carrying that characteristic gentleness that makes people lean in to hear him better. "I've spent most of my life trying to avoid talking about Jesus in Hollywood, not because I don't have thoughts about him, but because—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. In this industry, spiritual authenticity is often confused with publicity opportunities. A few uncomfortable shifts rippled through the audience. Keanu had just acknowledged something everyone knew but rarely voiced, that in Hollywood, even faith can become performance. "But your film tonight," Keanu continued, looking directly at Mel, "felt different. It felt like it came from a place of genuine seeking rather than certainty. And that's actually where I found Jesus most powerfully present in my own life." Mel nodded encouragingly, sensing that Keanu was preparing to share something significant. "Most people who know me know about the tragedies I've faced," Keanu said, his voice remaining steady despite the weight of what he was approaching. "The loss of my daughter River's death, the ongoing struggle with feeling disconnected from the world around me." The room was completely still now. Keanu's willingness to reference his well-documented struggles with loss and depression had created an atmosphere of intimate honesty that felt sacred. "What people don't know," Keanu continued, "is that for years I was angry at God, furious actually. I couldn't understand how a loving divine presence could allow such seemingly random cruelty. Children dying, good people suffering, the innocent bearing the weight of a world that often feels designed to break us." Several people in the audience exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual celebrity spiritual testimony of finding faith through success or gratitude. This was someone describing a wrestling match with the divine. "I remember sitting in a church once," Keanu said, his eyes focused on something beyond the screening room walls. "It was about 6 months after Ava died. I hadn't been to a service in years, but something drew me there that Sunday morning." The specificity of the memory, the way Keanu's voice dropped to almost a whisper, suggested they were about to hear something he'd never shared publicly before. The pastor was talking about Jesus' crucifixion, about the moment when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And I remember thinking, finally, someone who understands what it feels like to be abandoned by the very love that's supposed to sustain you. Mel's expression showed that he recognized something profound in Keanu's words. Not theological doctrine, but the lived experience of divine wrestling. "But then the pastor said something that stopped me cold," Keanu continued. "He said that in that moment of apparent abandonment, Jesus wasn't losing his faith. He was expressing the deepest kind of faith, the faith that says, I will cry out to you even when I can't feel you, even when everything suggests you're not there." The room had become cathedral quiet. Even the industry veterans who'd heard countless spiritual testimonies recognized that they were witnessing something rare. Genuine spiritual vulnerability from someone who had no agenda other than truth-telling. "That's when I realized," Keanu said, "that my anger at God wasn't the opposite of faith. It was actually a form of relationship. You don't get angry at someone you don't believe exists." The insight landed with the force of revelation. Several people nodded, recognizing the truth in Keanu's words about the strange intimacy of spiritual struggle. But what happened next, Keanu said, his voice gaining strength. What I experienced in the weeks that followed that church service changed everything I thought I understood about Jesus, about divine love, about the nature of redemption itself. Mel leaned forward, along with everyone else in the room, sensing that Keanu was approaching the heart of whatever revelation had shaped his understanding of faith. Because what I discovered, Keanu continued, is that Jesus didn't come to make our pain make sense. He came to make our pain feel less lonely. The distinction was subtle but profound, hanging in the air like a new understanding of ancient truth. But as Keanu prepared to explain what this realization meant for his own journey through grief and back to something resembling hope, it became clear that his story was about to take a turn that would challenge every conventional understanding of divine love and human transformation present in that room. The weeks following that church service, Keanu continued, his voice now carrying the weight of someone venturing into territory he'd never fully explored aloud, I started paying attention to Jesus in a way I never had before, not as a theological figure or a religious symbol, but as a person who understood suffering from the inside. The shift in his approach to faith, from doctrine to relationship, created a palpable change in the room's energy. This wasn't Sunday school theology. This was someone describing a genuine encounter with the sacred. I began reading the Gospels differently, Keanu said. Instead of looking for answers about the meaning of life, I was looking for evidence of how someone divinely connected dealt with the apparent meaninglessness of suffering. Mel's eyes brightened with recognition. As someone who had spent years crafting films about faith and redemption, he understood the profound difference between religious instruction and spiritual seeking. What I found, Keanu continued, was that Jesus spent most of his time with people who were broken, not the broken who had nice redemption stories to share, but the genuinely shattered, the ones society had written off, the ones who couldn't be fixed with good advice or positive thinking. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. In a culture obsessed with transformation narratives and self-improvement, Keanu was describing a different kind of spiritual reality, and I realized, Keanu's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, that Jesus wasn't trying to fix these people. He was trying to love them, not love them into wholeness, not love them conditionally based on their potential for improvement, just love them as they were in their brokenness. The distinction hit the room like a revelation. This wasn't the typical prosperity gospel message of divine love as a reward for good behavior. This was something more radical and more difficult. That's when something shifted for me, Keanu said, his eyes now bright with the memory of whatever transformation he was describing. I stopped asking God to explain why Ava died, why River overdosed, why life seems designed to break our hearts. Instead, I started asking if there was a way to experience divine love that didn't require understanding divine logic. The theological sophistication of his seeking became apparent. This wasn't someone who found faith through emotional experience alone, but someone who had wrestled intellectually and spiritually with profound questions. And that's when I had what I can only describe as an encounter, Keanu said. Not a vision or a voice or anything dramatic, just a moment of knowing that I wasn't alone in my pain. Mel leaned forward even further, recognizing the language of genuine mystical experience. I was walking through Griffith Park, Keanu continued, about 3 months after that church service. It was early morning, and I was thinking about Ava, feeling that familiar weight of grief that never really goes away. The specificity of place and time gave his story the ring of authentic memory rather than constructed narrative. And suddenly, Keanu said, his voice gaining strength, I felt this presence, not outside of me, but somehow alongside me, like someone was walking with me through the grief, not trying to take it away or explain it, just sharing the weight of it. The room was completely still now. Even the most skeptical industry veterans recognized that they were hearing something genuine, something that cost Keanu something to access and share. I stopped walking, Keanu continued, and I said out loud, Jesus, not as a prayer or a plea, just as a question, like you might call out to someone you think you recognize in a crowd. The simplicity and humanity of his approach to the divine created an atmosphere of intimacy that felt almost intrusive to witness. And I swear, Keanu said, his voice now thick with emotion, I heard something, not audibly but unmistakably, that said, I know, I've been here the whole time. not waiting for you to feel better or understand more or become more faithful, just here. Several people in the audience had tears in their eyes now. The raw authenticity of Keanu's experience was affecting even the most hardened Hollywood professionals. That's when I understood, Keanu said, that Jesus isn't about fixing broken people. He's about loving them so completely that their brokenness becomes bearable. Not meaningful, not purposeful, just bearable. The theological insight was profound in its simplicity and radical in its implications for how divine love operates in the world. But as Keanu prepared to explain how this encounter changed not just his understanding of Jesus, but his entire approach to living with grief and finding purpose in a broken world, it became clear that his most profound revelation was still coming, because what I discovered about the nature of divine love would challenge everything the room thought they knew about redemption, forgiveness, and the possibility of hope in the midst of seemingly meaningless suffering. But here's where it got difficult, Keanu continued, his expression showing the complexity of someone who has wrestled with profound spiritual truth. This experience, this sense of divine presence, it didn't make anything easier. If anything, it made my grief more complicated. The honesty of his admission created a stir in the room. Most spiritual testimonies follow a predictable arc, from darkness to light, from struggle to resolution. Keanu was describing something more nuanced and challenging. I spent weeks after that morning in the park trying to understand what had happened to me, he said. Was it real? Was it wishful thinking? Was it some kind of psychological breakthrough disguised as a spiritual experience? Mel nodded knowingly. As someone who has explored faith through both personal struggle and artistic expression, he understood the intellectual challenges that accompany genuine spiritual encounter. The rational part of my mind, Keanu continued, wanted to dismiss the whole thing. After all, I'm an actor. I make my living inhabiting other people's experiences, accessing emotions on demand. How could I trust that this wasn't just another performance? Even if it was a performance for myself, the self-awareness in his questioning revealed the depth of his spiritual wrestling. This wasn't someone who found easy faith, but someone grappling with the relationship between imagination and revelation. But the more I tried to rationalize it away, Keanu said, the more I realized that something fundamental had shifted in how I experience my daily life. Not my circumstances. Those remained largely the same, but my relationship to my circumstances. Several audience members exchanged glances, recognizing the subtle but profound distinction he was making. I was still grieving Ava, Keanu explained. I still missed River terribly. I still struggled with feelings of isolation and meaninglessness that had plagued me for years. But somehow, these struggles felt inhabited. The word choice was striking. Rather than describing healing or resolution, Keanu was talking about companionship and suffering. It was like discovering that pain I thought I was experiencing alone was actually shared. He continued, not taken away, not explained, but somehow witnessed. The theological implications of what he was describing began to settle over the room. This wasn't about divine intervention that removes suffering, but about divine presence that transforms suffering. For months, Keanu said, I fought against this new understanding. Part of me wanted to return to the clean simplicity of anger at God. At least anger felt honest, felt justified. This new sense of divine companionship felt dangerous. Mel's expression showed deep understanding. Dangerous how? He asked. Because, Keanu responded, it required me to consider the possibility that love, real love, doesn't always manifest as rescue. Sometimes it manifests as presence in the midst of unrescued circumstances. The insight hit the room with the force of theological revolution. For people raised on narratives of divine intervention and miraculous healing, Keanu was describing something more complex and perhaps more profound. I realized I was resisting this understanding because it challenged every assumption I'd made about how divine love should operate. Keanu continued, I wanted God to love me by fixing my life. Jesus seemed to be offering to love me by sharing my unfixed life. The distinction created a moment of profound silence as everyone present processed the implications. There were days, Keanu admitted, When I wished I could go back to atheism, at least as an atheist, my suffering was just random cosmic bad luck. This new understanding made my suffering relational. The complexity of his spiritual journey became clear. Rather than finding simple comfort in faith, Keanu had discovered that genuine spiritual experience can be more challenging than spiritual absence. But I couldn't unknow what I'd experienced, he said. Once you felt divine presence in your pain, you can't go back to experiencing that pain as purely personal. It becomes, I don't know how else to say this, it becomes shared pain. The concept he was describing, suffering as a form of communion rather than isolation, represented a radical departure from typical Western spirituality, and that's when I began to understand something about Jesus that changed everything, Keanu said, his voice gaining intensity, something that most Christian teaching had completely missed, something that your film tonight actually captured in ways I've never seen before. Mel's eyes widened with anticipation, understanding that Keanu was approaching the heart of whatever revelation had moved this notoriously private man to speak so openly about matters of the spirit. Jesus knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, Keanu said. He had the power to undo the very tragedy that was causing everyone's grief, but he wept anyway. The paradox hung in the air like a question waiting to be answered. And I thought, Keanu continued, his voice thick with emotion, why would someone with the power to fix suffering choose to feel it instead? Several people in the audience leaned forward, drawn into